questions are going to be the ones that have fails to consider and takes for granted, right? Because for flaw questions, you're just pointing out what they
What's
forgot
wrong?
about. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Whereas with weakening, it's presenting a new fact that
weaken the whole
that weakens the argument. Yeah. Fails to consider, takes for granted, flaw questions, there's no new fact that you're introducing. You're just talking about what they did wrong. So again, I'm going to do a really simple definition for these two. How do you, and first I'll ask you, and I feel bad because I'm probably going to change your definition, but I just want to know, how do you understand these two? Fails to consider and takes for granted.
Fails to consider, like, doesn't recognize that there, well, I was going to say it doesn't recognize that there could be other factors.
Yes. Yeah, that's
but
true.
Isn't that including like outside information? That's not
No,
a stimulus?
no. It has to be relevant. As long as it's relevant. Because the thing is, any weakening question will always introduce new information, right? The thing that you're thinking about is a little bit different. What you want to do is not make assumptions. And we'll talk about that when we do an actual question. We'll talk about not making assumptions in order to, that's more like what happens to people is they make assumptions to help answer choices. And they pick an answer choice because they say,
This sounds right.
and they help the answer choice too much by assuming things. But you have to go by what it actually said. So we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
That's a good one to talk about later. But for fails to consider, yeah, your definition was good. You have a good understanding of it, I think. What about takes for granted?
That's a little tricky.
Think about, you probably, the thing about the LSAT is no one speaks like this in real life, but if you were to use takes for granted in a sentence, or if you're in a situation, think about a real life situation where you know that someone's taking something for granted. Not in like a relationship where they're taking a person for granted, but different definition or different situation.
I don't know how to explain it in
Not sure. That's fine. Here, I'll give you really simple, again, just like the conclusion premise, really simple definitions for the two. So fails to consider, I just define it as doesn't assume, and then takes for granted, I define it as assumes. That's how you can think about them. Or in this one, you could say forgets about. Let's think about your original argument or my original argument. They're pretty similar. So Alex is the best. I forgot his last name. Sorry, I didn't hear it correctly. What was the last name? Alex Burrows?
Yeah.
Okay. So Alex Burrows is the best forward in the NHL, you said?
Yes.
Okay. Alex Burrows is the best forward in the NHL because most points and most goals as a forward. What did you forget about, do you think? What did you fail to consider, quote unquote?
Like other factors.
And actually, you came up with one earlier, right? Because you said fails to consider that there may be another. Exactly. So you actually came up with one. Yeah. So that's a fails to consider. Do you think you could take that same flaw that you pointed out? Let me write it down so it's a little bit easier. So let's say we take that same flaw, forgets about the possibility that there could be another player with the same stats, right? Another forward, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you take that same thing and turn it into a takes for granted or assumes sentence? So assumes that.
There's another player with the same amount of stats.
But in the like, I want you to be countering. So if you're trying to point out what's wrong with the argument, would you say that assumes that
Alex Burrows is the only one with the highest number of stats?
Yes. So remember I was saying before, they are two sides of the same coin. So you can say the same exact thing that you say in fails to consider, you can say it as a takes for granted. And you've probably never seen that before or been told that before.
Yeah, no.
But it's something that nobody teaches, but it's something that when you teach LSAT for 5 years, you realize these things. So I realized that a while ago, and I was like, they don't really make it obvious. You know, people, like how this drill is actually set up is it wants you to go, is this a fails to consider argument or is this a takes for granted argument? And I realized after a while, because people were having such different answers on this. Some people would say takes for granted, some people would say fails to consider. I'm like, actually, you can look at all of them in both ways. So whenever you get a question that has fails to consider or takes for granted, you can think about it in these ways. So fails to consider, you think about it, forgets about or doesn't think about, and then takes for granted, you think about assumes. Just one word, assumes. That's a very simple way to think about those two. Okay, now let's do the actual drill. Let's do a couple of them. And then I want you to do all of them after on your own time.
Got it.
So since Billy got a cookie, I should get a cookie. So what do you think this person fails to consider? And what do we call fails to consider again? Forgets about. So forgets about I'll let you finish it.
Forgets about that maybe she shouldn't get a cookie.
About the fact or the possibility that I think I want you to change it a little bit. Forgets about the possibility that how I want you the thing about what you did is you attack the conclusion and just change the conclusion.
Yeah. Forgets about the possibility.
Think about it a little bit differently.
That just because Billy got a cookie doesn't mean she should get a cookie.
Yeah, exactly. Forgets about the possibility that just because he got a cookie doesn't necessarily mean that she should get one. Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, you could even make this a fact, but possibility is better because it's better to not be super strong on those. Okay, takes for granted, which is the same as.
Assumes.
Okay, so what did she assumes? Sorry, what did she assume?
That because Billy got a cookie, she should get a cookie.
Exactly. That just, and I'll use the same words just to show, it's the same thing. Assumes that just because B got a cookie,
I should get a cookie.
yeah, there you go. So that falls into one of the logical fallacies. I think it's kind of a part versus whole, but I'm gonna ignore that for now. For this one, I'm gonna ignore for now because this one is kind of too basic of an argument. It's not even. It's okay. Let's do the second one, and we'll spend more time on the second one and talk about what the actual fallacy is because it comes up a lot. So this one, how would you point out the flaw in this one?
It forgets that candy could also have other risk factors that are proved to be not healthy.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe said in a little bit different way, could have many things in it that make it unhealthy. Yeah. Unhealthy, we'll say unhealthy overall. And then takes for granted or assumes
that just because it has vitamin C, candy's good.
Yep. There you go. So same flaw, just said in two different ways. Now, this one falls very neatly into one of the logical fallacies that we talk about. And it is part versus whole. I don't know if you learned about this.
No, I didn't.
No? So just from the name, you could probably guess what it is and why this falls into it. You want to think about that a little bit and explain to me? So why do you think I say that this falls into the part versus whole fallacy? And what do you think part versus whole is referring to?
I actually have no idea.
No? Okay, maybe I'll ask it in a different way. So there's a part and a whole in this. What do you think would be the part and what do you think would be the whole in this argument?
Candy is healthy because it contains vitamin C would be the whole.
Think about it a little bit, just one word. So which object would be the whole and which object would be the part? Which thing?
I think it's because and the which.
I'm asking a difficult question because you're not sure what I'm actually getting at.
Yeah.
So I'll show you what I mean. What I mean by that is the whole is the candy.
Oh.
And the part is what, do you think? Think about it. What is a whole made out of? It's made out of parts, right? So candy is made out of one part of candy in this example is
vitamin C.
The vitamin C. Now, part versus whole fallacy, what it is where maybe you can, well, should I let you guess what it is? What part versus whole fallacy is then? If vitamin C is the part, candy is the whole, what do you think in general terms? What do you think the mistake here is that this person is making?
Saying that one thing is just like
Mhm.
one thing is good enough for it to be a whole. Like
Exactly,
consider it a
right?
whole.
Yeah, so just one part of candy is healthy, so then candy is healthy overall? No, not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Think about a computer, right? It has a really good, fast processor, but all the other parts are from 1992. It's not going to be a fast computer overall, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. The part doesn't make the whole. Think about sports. Someone is 6'4" and in really good shape, but they don't know how to dribble a basketball. They can't play in the NBA tomorrow, right? Maybe one day, but they have the physical ability, but they don't have the technical ability. So that's like a part versus whole, where you say, well, um, this person can run really fast. They have really good vertical. They are a really good athlete. They can play in the NBA tomorrow. But what about all the skills that they need? Do they have the skills? So you're putting more emphasis
On
on
one thing.
one particular aspect while ignoring everything else, right? And that's the exact same thing that's happening here, right? You're putting all your emphasis on the vitamin C, but you're ignoring the sugar, you're ignoring the high fructose corn syrup, you're ignoring whatever else is in candy, right? Sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, whatever. So just because it has one thing that's good about it doesn't mean the whole thing is good. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's your part versus whole fallacy in general. Can you think of an example of and think about your own life that people try to convince you of things, or let's say you watch an advertisement and tries to convince you of something, right?
Yeah.
Have you
Um,
seen these part versus whole fallacies in your everyday life?
I mean, like I could use a makeup example.
Okay.
Um,
I'll try to
like,
understand it.
oh, sorry.
No, I'm joking. I have a wife, so I understand.
Oh,
I
okay.
think I'll understand it. I actually will, I think.
Like an advertisement, like, oh, if this like mascara
Okay.
makes your lashes look longer,
Okay.
would that work?
So wait,
Just because it
what are they
like
ignoring?
not everyone's lashes will do the same thing.
Is that
Or
necessarily part versus whole, do you think?
probably not.
You could think of one with the mascara. You could. So
Um,
let's use your example. I think you can come up with a part versus whole way to attack that. So there's that I'm imagining a commercial. They are using the mascara and then it plumps up the eyelashes. And then they
yeah,
say, oh, look how great these eyelashes look with this mascara because of this mascara. What do you
yeah,
think they're potentially? I think it's actually what you were saying. So I think you were on the right track actually, because you're saying basically, well, not everybody has potentially the eyelashes that work with that
yeah,
mascara.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I get what you're saying. So
Okay.
yeah, that is kind of a part versus whole because the key to having those really good, well, it's subjective, whatever people consider as those really good eyelashes. Um, well, part of it is a mascara, but another part of it is
Really
genetics and
eyelashes to begin with.
upkeep and maintenance and everything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Exactly. So absolutely, that's a part versus whole. Yeah. I think advertising probably you could think of a logical fallacy for every advertisement that you watch, right?
yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to do. You'll start seeing the world differently after learning
I
something.
think I'll start picking up on that.
Well, you will, actually. It changes how you think. And it gets kind of annoying because sometimes people get annoyed that, oh, why are you nitpicking everything? And it's just
Yeah.
like,
And I think I've
well,
done it in the past myself. I've actually
mhm.
said it like, this is not true just because it is doesn't mean that
Yeah,
it's right.
exactly. Because, yeah, it's true because these logical fallacies, people make them all the time.
Yeah, right. Like
And
in their regular daily lives.
yeah, yeah. What's an example in
Like
that
a daily
example?
life.
Did you say dating life?
Oh no.
Daily life. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. But I was thinking part versus whole applies to dating too. Do you get what I'm getting at? Or can you think about what I'm Not really. So, for example, parents might put a lot of emphasis on career and let's just say career, right? When it comes to dating, a
Yeah.
parent might put all their emphasis on, okay, all that matters is that they have a good job, but then they ignore everything else, right?
Yeah.
So that's
That
do you
works.
see how that's a part versus whole fallacy, right? Because they're overly focused on one aspect, but they ignore everything else. What if they're a psychopath? What if they're
Whatever.
yeah, anything could be wrong with them or not good for them, right? Or not good for the other person.
Yeah.
So that's a really obvious one. There's actually an example in here. If you look at this example, right? That's why I thought of it that's why I immediately understood when I thought you said that,
Oh,
because
okay.
there's an example in here, right?
Got
So do you see how this is also a part versus whole? Because what else is there to consider there?
Is he a good person? Is he? There's so many other things to consider.
Exactly.
Smart.
That arguably matter more, right? Okay, cool. So that part versus whole thing shows up all the time.
Okay.
Not just in the book, but on the actual test. So just get used to it, and that's a really good one to know. All of them are good to know, though. Okay, the next one. This one fits into one of the fallacies as well. What do you think? How would you describe? You don't even have to use the fails to consider takes for granted so much. Just tell me, how do you understand this, and do you think it's a good argument, bad argument? What do you think?
I would say it's like a bad argument
Okay, why do you think so?
because it says there's no oh, maybe not, because it says there's no evidence that the monster is not real. There's no evidence that
It's a little bit confusing, right? How it's worded.
yes, because I just read the not. There's no evidence. So it's basically saying that there is evidence, right?
That's what it's concluding, right? So think about these in conclusion and premise terms as well, right? So what is the conclusion in this one?
That the monster exists.
Probably exists, yeah.
Yeah, so it probably exists.
Okay, and the reason? Because
There's no evidence that it does not exist. Doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
there's no evidence that it doesn't exist. So basically, we don't have evidence that it's not there, so it must be there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think about it again? Do you think that that's a good reason?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Okay. Why? And honestly, this one's a little bit of it's not a super common one. And it's how you generalize this one is evidence or lack of evidence against does not equal evidence for. So that's the more generalization of this one. And do you see how would you say that this applies to this one, this argument?
Are you saying evidence for is like it's not enough for it to like exist?
What I'm saying is that just because you don't have evidence against something, that fact that you don't have evidence for the fact that you don't have evidence against something is not, you cannot use it as evidence for something.
Oh, got it. Okay. So
Yeah.
because not like okay, I get it.
And it's pretty straightforward. I'm sure you could think of other examples, but there's no evidence against there's no evidence saying that aliens don't exist, so aliens probably, well, I don't know. Can't really say. Aliens might exist, but that's not a good reason for believing in it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It goes the other way too, by the way. So this is one way to do it. I think the more simple way is the other way, where you have lack of evidence for does not equal evidence against. So for example, there is no evidence that aliens exist. So ignore what I said before. This is a new one. So I say there's no evidence that aliens exist. Therefore, aliens do not exist. Well, that's not necessarily true, right?
I
Maybe
think
we just haven't
this way
found
is
that.
easier to understand.
It is definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're two different things. That's the thing. So they're not the same fallacy. They're similar, right? It's kind of, one is kind of like the opposite of the other. So if you have to know which one is which. So if I give you an example, there is no evidence that aliens exist, therefore they do not exist. So this one fits into this one, right? Would you say so?
Yeah.
So that's different than the other one, which is lack of evidence against does not equal evidence for. If I was to make an alien argument for this one, it would be more like there is no evidence against the existence of aliens. Therefore, it probably exists. And that's the one that we got in the example, right? But do you see they're different things, but they're more like opposites? Let me know if something doesn't make sense.
Yes. Okay. No. Yeah. I had to reread
Right?
it. Sorry.
They're different things, but they're opposites of each other. So they're easy to understand in tandem. The good news is the first one, the one on the top, that's actually the one that you'll see more often. So people will say, oh, there's no evidence of fraud here. Therefore, there definitely wasn't fraud. And when I say people, I actually mean on the LSAT, on the questions, right? Because they'll say politician, colon, blah,
Yeah.
right? So whoever's making the argument in that question, they'll make this error a lot more than the second one, which is a good thing. The first one's very easy to think about because I think it happens a lot in real life and there's no negatives going on and stuff like that. So it's easier to understand. So yeah, you don't have evidence for something, doesn't mean it's not there, right? I have no evidence that I have a brain inside my head, but I probably do. Everyone else does, so probably. Because I can't physically see it, right? I can't
Yeah.
touch it. I can't feel it. I could get a brain scan, but I've never done that before. So technically, I don't have any evidence that it's in there, but I'm pretty sure it's in there. Hopefully. Okay, so that's another one there, and the flip side was the other one that I showed up top. We'll do one more, and then maybe we'll take a break, or maybe I'll let you do the fallacies on your own after. But okay, so this next one is about Tangled. Have you seen Tangled?
I have not. No.
No, me neither. I just know it has a really good song. When will my life
Isn't it
begin? It is, yeah. I think it came out when we were, at least I was a little bit too old for it when it came out. But I never watched Disney as a kid anyway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it came out in 2010, so
That's how
I don't,
old it is?
it's pretty old now. But
Oh, wow.
I think I was like a teenager at that time, so I was a little bit too
Is
old
there a
for it.
newer one? Or am I just mixing these movies up now?
Tangled 2? I don't know. There is a
Mhm.
Tangled 2, but it came out in 2012.
Oh, I wouldn't remember those. Wow. Okay.
No, time flies, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway, so the reason they're using this example is because this is a 5-year-old making these arguments in this scenario. So scenario 1, it's a 5-year-old making these arguments. So keep that in mind because that's actually important for this one. So this is a 5-year-old making this argument. And she says, of course, Tangled is the best movie ever. All of my friends agree. So what do you think about that argument?
She forgets that there's more people than her friends.
That whose opinion matter, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like she's failing to consider that there are more people that would have opinions of the movie.
And that their opinions are important, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's basically saying like a small portion, like her friends. That's it.
That's actually the more important thing. The second thing you said is
Okay.
that this is just a small portion of the population. Right? So there's actually two things that are wrong with this one. So one is what you said the second time. I like that they're only asking 5-year-old girls, probably. I don't know. I don't think she's friends with 30-year-olds. So probably if it's her friends, it's most likely just other 5-year-old people.
Yeah.
So if they think Tangled is the best movie ever, that's not a representative sample. So that's the error with this one. If you were to generalize it, it's unrepresentative sample is the generalized fallacy here. I'm sure, I don't know if you take any stats courses or psych courses, you probably learned about unrepresentative samples, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
in,
So,
like,
mhm.
sorry, I learned it in psychology.
Cool. So it's an unrepresentative sample, and how just fine tuning it for the LSAT, a definition for that, it's something where the data is not consistent with your conclusion. So data slash premise is not consistent with your conclusion. And let me explain that. So how that works is if my conclusion is doctors in Canada over the age of 40 love Breaking Bad, right? And I'll say most doctors. So it's a little bit easier because it's hard to prove that every single doctor likes it. Well, let's even make it a little bit easier. Let's just say many. So there's a good amount of doctors in Canada over the age of 40 that love that show. Who should I be surveying then? If I want to prove this conclusion, who should I be surveying?
People over the age of 40.
Who over the age of 40?
People. Or sorry, doctors, I guess.
Doctors over the, yeah. So survey doctors over 40 in Canada, right? So it just has to be consistent. So if my conclusion is about doctors in Canada over the age of 40, I better only survey doctors in Canada over the age of 40. And what else should I do when I do this survey? I live in Toronto, so what else should I do when I do this survey?
Ask doctors in Toronto
And
over the age of 40.
but what is my conclusion? My conclusion is
Right.
doctors in Canada. So I should ask doctors where?
In Canada.
But across Canada, right? Do you get what I mean? I don't want to just ask people in Toronto or doctors in Toronto
Oh, okay. Yeah, so
because that's what it
everybody.
means to be representative, right? I'm
Got
giving
it.
a more representative sample. So I'm serving across Canada, not just in one area in Canada,
Okay, yeah.
right?
Different.
So think about that too. So whenever you get something that's based on research or surveys or something like that, always think about these things and on the LSAT, right? When they give you an argument that's based on research like that, always think about these things. If they made a conclusion about people living in Vancouver in condo buildings, well, they shouldn't be interviewing people in Seattle that live in condo buildings because that's not necessarily the same thing. Even though they're very close to each other, you're making a conclusion about Vancouver, so you should only ask people in Vancouver, right? So that's, and then the other way around too, where if I say in Canada or in Vancouver, well, I shouldn't just be surveying people in Vancouver that live around BC. I should be surveying people that live all around Vancouver, right? To be representative. So same thing in Canada, survey all around Canada, not just in one spot in Canada. So that's everything that goes into a representative sample. So it's actually really, really difficult to get a representative sample of something, depending on how precise your conclusion is. Because let's say my conclusion is people in the world like chocolate. That's a really hard one to survey for because I got to survey people in everywhere, right? And not just one person in New York City. I would have to do a bunch of people in New York City. And not just one person in Mozambique, but at least a few people in Mozambique.
Yeah, so it's like very vague.
Yeah, because it's such a broad conclusion, then you need it's very hard to get a representative sample for that. But anyway, that's more detailed than you need to know. All you need to know is that it needs to be consistent between the conclusion and your premise. And I use premise, evidence, research. I use it interchangeably because that is what premises are, right? They're evidence or research, right? Or reasons. Premises are also reasons. So all of those words you can use interchangeably. Yeah, right. This one, clearly unrepresentative sample because they only asked 5-year-olds, most likely. We don't know for sure that it's an unrepresentative sample, but probably it is. The other thing, when it says best movie ever, because her friends agree with her, what do you think about that? Can you say that something is the best ever because a bunch of people think it's the best ever?
I would say no.
Not necessarily, right? Yeah. How do you If something is subjective like that, does that mean it's the best? It could be the most liked or highly
Like,
regarded, but
like,
what are you gonna say?
like it can't be the best ever with such a small portion of people's opinion.
That too, but even just the concept of, think about the concept of something being the best. When it comes to a movie, can you use opinions to necessarily say that something is the best ever? It's kind of hard to say, right? Because
Yeah.
that's very subjective.
Yeah.
So to say that it's the best movie ever that's problematic in and of itself. You should say something, what's easier to prove is something like it's the most popular movie ever, right? That you can be more certain about because you can say, oh, it's the most popular movie ever because 99% or like this is the movie where the most people like it, right? This is the number one most popular movie, right?
Yeah.
You can say those things, but it's for something that's subjective, it's not really great to say that it's the best. It's hard, it's almost impossible to prove that really. That would inherently be flawed. And I know we did a bunch of examples where we just talked about the best NBA player or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or NHL player. But that concept in and of itself is a bit problematic because it's hard to say if something subjective is the best. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you get that? So that's not, that's just like a second flaw with this. The main thing is the unrepresentative sample. That's really what you want to think about in this one. But I have a problem with saying that something is the best when it's a movie, which is really subjective, right? So you can think about that too. You might run into stuff like that. You might run into stuff like that on the test too, where they're trying to prove something subjective, but it's like you should be wary of that. When they're trying to prove something that's subjective, it's hard to say that something that's subjective is definitely this best or definitely the worst or anything like that.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we have like 13 minutes left. Do you want to, or 15, let's round up, 15 minutes left. Do you think it's too much to keep going or do you want to just cut it there?
No, I can keep going.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we'll keep going. So this is unrepresentative sample. I want you to learn some of the other ones. They'll be in that file that I share with you. For now, I think let's do a sample question just to keep things interesting. I'm going to pull up a random question and we'll do a flaw question because that's what we've been doing for a little bit now. So by the way, how are you doing the questions? Do you have the Law Hub membership?
I have the LSAT one. I have Khan Academy as well.
Okay. But on Khan Academy, you don't get all of the questions, right? It's just a few?
No, yeah.
So it's the LSAC thing where you get all of the questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, I mean, I will share PDFs of all these questions too. These are official questions. It's the same questions, but they're just numbered in a different way. They're organized in a different way.
Okay.
But they're the same questions that you'll find on Law Hub, but just the numbering is different. So you won't be able to say, okay, this test one, like on the LSAC thing, it goes test 1 something, 100 something. On these ones, it starts from test number 1. So the numbering is different. And don't think that 101 is the same as test 1. It's not. They're different. But the questions are the same. So you could potentially find this exact question like while doing your studying. You might run into it. So I'm gonna send you in the file, in the documents that I send you, you'll have these PDFs to use if you want to. But obviously you can just continue using your Law Hub membership too. Okay, so let's find a flaw question. So do you see on this page, do you see a flaw question here? Which one or multiple do you think, or if any?
Number 8.
And it's easy, right? You just see the words vulnerable to criticism. There you go. So that's all you need to know. And look, it's our friends that fails to consider, takes for granted. This one's a little bit different. Fails to define. That's a unique one. Fails to establish. That's a unique one too. But it's the stuff that we talked about. So all the stuff that we talked about, it's here. So this is a good one to kind of combine what we've done so far, right?